Hello, I'm Kerry Harris, one of Jude's deputies at Queensmill, and I just wondered, do you think autism would have been something you'd have wanted to research regardless of the fact that you were lucky enough to have Isabel as a daughter, purely as an anthropologist?
Yeah, I was trained as a psychological anthropologist, and so I've always been interested in the question of whether emotion and mental illness were universal or varied across cultures. But like many people who work on autism, I have a child with autism. And if you were to go to the IMFAR meetings, these are the International Meetings for Autism Research, and ask for a show of hands in the reception area of how many people have a child with autism, you'd be amazed. A lot of people get into this field precisely because of that personal interest. But for me, you know, I had a particular background that pushed me in this area. My great-grandfather was a psychiatrist. My grandfather was a psychiatrist, and my father is still a psychiatrist practicing at the age of 85. He had one of his patients he's had for 52 years. Means he's either great or terrible. I don't know. And I was, of course, supposed to be the fourth-generation psychiatrist, and I was not, you know, not surprisingly, a great disappointment to all of them. But for me, this was an opportunity to work on something that I felt that I had a particular perspective on. And I did not think that I would bring my daughter into it. But, you know, this is something that for her is meaningful. And I certainly wouldn't have done it had she not also seemed to enjoy it. I mean, she did not mind that I was writing about her. She seemed to enjoy it. Yeah, I don't know that I would have worked on autism. I might have worked on something else. I did a book in the 90s on kind of psychological difficulties of North Korean defectors adjusting to South Korea, and, you know, had nothing to do with autism really, but sure.
Another person here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Elizabeth. My son Raymond goes to Queensmill. He has autism as well. I'd just like to know what your opinions regarding twice exceptional. I've heard it before. It's like a child having autism as well as being gifted. Do you have any opinions on that? Because I've read it somewhere. It's quite unclear to me that would a child with autism be gifted as well?
Well, I don't have any particular expertise on that. But I can tell you that when I do travel, this notion of there being a savant syndrome or there being a particular island of great skill has a lot of traction. Has a lot of traction in a lot of places in the world. And it's not surprising to me that people would try to embrace this. It's also not surprising to me that some people would have exceptional skills in a particular area, because one of the features of developmental disorders in general is scatter. Great strengths in some areas, great weaknesses in others. Now, Isabel, I think she's a very good artist, but I wouldn't call her a genius artist. I don't think she's going to have a career in art. So for me, what counts as exceptional is something that she finds meaningful and that she can pursue and feel good about. It doesn't mean that she has to make money from it or show in galleries or anything like that, but that she pursues something that is for her. Because when she does that, and I think when any kid does this, when any human being pursues something that's a hobby or an interest intensively, they end up developing in ways that you wouldn't expect. And so I guess my response to the whole idea of savant type of issues is compare your child to your child, and not your child to some imagined norm or some imagined dream that you might have, because you'll always be disappointed if you're comparing your child to some imagined illusionary norm. You compare your child to your child, and you'll always see development, and you'll always see change, and you'll always see some areas of exceptionality, whether it's in a skill or whether it's in their delightful personality.
I've heard people say that the Rain Man has a lot to answer for, you know, in the sense that he's raised awareness a lot, but it created the idea of these exceptional skills probably being much more common.
What does that mean, an exceptional
Indeed.
skill?
Another hand here.
Hi, my name's Rob Ford. I'm from a teacher EBD unit in Watford. I'm interested in, do you think, if you had control of all the money for the research, do you think we've got more to learn from the global aspects and seeing things through different eyes, or through our sort of classical research in the Western world? You know, if you had to split that money up, how would you split it?
That's a big question.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very big question. You know, I think that one of the difficulties that I've always had when I try to look objectively at funding is that where you put your funding isn't necessarily where you get your benefit. So just as an example, if you were to look at some of the developments in cancer research, they don't come from money that was put into cancer studies. They come from money that was put into studies on AIDS, that have produced studies about therapies that target certain genes, they're immunotherapies, and then that's affected cancer. So who knew that if you did put money into AIDS research, it would help cancer? So we don't know where the growth is going to come in helping people with autism. But I certainly think that if I had, you know, if I was rich and I was able to dole out some money, I would want to put that research toward understanding the distribution and the appearance of autism in other parts of the world where kids aren't getting services. I mean, it's really the service disparity that to me is the major concern, because I see how much kids benefit from good schools. I see how much they benefit from small classrooms and from caring and trained teachers. And I'm certainly not personally particularly interested in notions of causality and etiology unless they are going to have an impact on improving the lives of people. And you know, if you do any type of work internationally, you see people who just aren't getting anything. I mean, I was in a third grade classroom observing in South Korea, and there was a girl in that third grade classroom who clearly had a chromosomal abnormality. She had cranial and facial deformities. Because she was flagged as someone who might have developmental issues, we did IQ tests on her in the study and found she had an IQ of 50. And yet this is somebody in a mainstream class environment of 50 students with no special education services and nobody doing anything about her. And the teacher didn't even flag her as having a developmental concern. It was the parents that did, and their screener. And we went to the teacher and said, why didn't you even tell us about this child? I mean, I could see her, that she's got some issues. And she said, well, she causes no trouble. And that was it. I mean, she was able to be in that environment, but she wasn't getting any help, any services. And then a little girl came up to me, and a little girl and a little boy, and they said, you know, I overheard you asking about, you know, so-and-so, and we have to sit next to her when we get punished. I mean, so this was a terrible situation. That, you know, that's the sort of thing that I would try to put money into if I could, because it's just something you see when you're traveling internationally with your eyes. It's not a number, it's not a statistic, it's not a gene or something under a microscope. It's like a human rights situation.
There's somebody right at the back. Oh.
Hi, good evening. My name's Mark. I work with Mishka at I'm Interactive, and have probably had my eyes more open to autism through connection with Jude and Queensmill School. One question I would ask is, I worry these days about the necessity for pigeonholing individuals into particular types, and it would appear that that would be the case to some degree with autism. But having noticed some of the elements that manifest themselves within the autistic spectrum, is it not fair to say that somewhere within that spectrum that there is a place where we all sit? Not just specific individuals that we then label as being autistic, but somewhere where, if you looked at that entire spectrum, it's probably actually bigger than we would actually think. And we probably all sit on that spectrum somewhere with some of the elements of behaviour that manifest within all of us. Is that fair to say?
I wish I could just answer your question by saying yes, which I mean, I want to. My answer is yes, but I know you expect more. Expect me to say more than that. Research on behavior and as well as genetic research is bearing out exactly what you're saying, that autism does exist as a continuum of traits. And for this reason, there are a lot of experts who don't believe that it's a good idea to create subtypes of autism, like Asperger's disorder, or PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, because of two reasons. Number one, autistic traits are distributed throughout the population. How do we decide? It seems so arbitrary, where one begins and one ends. But then the other reason is that these categories don't necessarily take into account just how much someone changes over time. And so the problem that you're noting is a problem with all mental illness or psychiatric categories, which is that they're categorical rather than dimensional. They say, well, you have it or you don't have it. But yet, what is the purpose of a diagnosis? The purpose of a diagnosis is to understand and treat and help someone. And so if you've got, I have no problem with labels as long as they're non-stigmatizing labels. The point is, do the criteria that you have and the classifications that you have help you to understand how a person is also going to change over time? And I think when you see the new DSM-5 that will come out in a year or two, probably more like 2, then I think you'll see more attention to that. Because I think that there is a movement to seeing all psychiatric conditions as, to some extent, developmental disorders.